Be glad to take your questions. April,
Well, thank you, Sean.
how are you today?
I'm fine, and how are you?
Fantastic.
Well, Sean, going back to some issues that are in the news, Nunes is not going to recuse himself. In the midst of all of this back and forth, what does the White House say about that?
Well, April, the White House, as I think I mentioned this yesterday, I mean, he's conducting an investigation. He is the elected or appointed, I can't remember how they do HIPSI over there, but appointed and confirmed or however but by his colleagues in the House and the Speaker. He is the chairman. He's conducting an investigation. It is up to the House of Representatives and the Speaker and the members of the House Republican Conference to determine. But I mean, there's nothing that I see that is problematic in him conducting an investigation that we asked both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees.
Conversations the president is having with Paul Ryan about this, because many, to include Dems and Republicans, are talking about what looks like impropriety in the intel chief's handling of this so far, particularly as there's not a hearing right now.
Well, I would take issue with I think you're right that there may appear to be certain things, but I don't think there's any actual proof or sustaining allegation about anything that's done. Again, I mentioned this yesterday. If you look at what Chairman Nunes has done, he has met with people who are cleared to discuss classified information regarding a review that he is conducting. That's how it's supposed to. I will tell you that I've seen reports in the media that the NSA has documents that they are supposedly trying to get to the House Intelligence Committee that have been requested. We think that's a great thing, if that's in fact what's happening.
You said to us from the podium you would look into how Chairman Nunes was cleared here and with whom he met. Can you give us, we tried to ask you that yesterday as you walked out. Do you have any information to live up to the commitment you made here on Monday to provide more details about how that happened in a process you just told us that, again, is above board and totally appropriate?
I don't have anything for you on that at this time. But again, I don't.
What do you look into?
I have asked some preliminary questions. I have not gotten answers yet, and I think so no, I don't have anything further on that. But again, I would argue, Major, it's interesting, and I brought this up the other day, that there seems to be this fascination with the process. It's how did he get here? What door did he enter? As opposed to what's the substance of what we're finding. When I get, not from you, and I'm not trying to be, but it's so many times I get these calls that we have an unnamed intel source that says the following substance occurred. Do you admit it? Do you deny it? Whatever. And we have this argument over substance. In this case, the fascination is with what door did he come in? Who did he meet with? How did he get waved in? As opposed to what I think it should be, and ironically it's not when it's the shoes on the other foot, is what's the substance? Just yesterday, just to be clear, we started this day with the Washington Post falsely posting a story saying the White House blocked Sally Yates, right? By the end of the day, it's officials blocked Sally Yates. They were wrong, and they jumped to a conclusion based on whatever unnamed sources. And I think that what we're trying to do is argue that there should be a process. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and others are going through a review. We support that review. And so as much as I understand that everyone wants to jump to how did everyone get in? What did they do? They're undergoing an investigation.
I have a substantive question about that.
Okay.
But I'm just asking you about something you told us.
No, I said I would look into it.
Are you going to continue to look into it?
I will. I will look into it, and whether or not.
You live up to that obligation.
I will. But the obligation is, I said I would look into it, and I would continue to do that. We're damned if we're doing, we're damned if we don't on this stuff. Because on the one hand, you want certain answers. On the other hand, you want to talk about us being involved. And I think we've tried to keep. If we asked for an investigation, and at the same time, we've tried to make sure that we allow that review to go on, that both the House and the Senate Intelligence. So we can't cherry pick every time that you decide that a piece of information is relevant to what you want. I think that we know that they are undertaking a review. Hold on.
Going on, and the members of the very committee
But that's-
themselves say they don't know
Fair enough,
what is
and
being
that's
discussed.
right.
How is the process going forward? How is that a workable process?
Okay, but what I'm saying is, the answer to that question is, that's a question for Chairman Nunes. I don't have any authority over how the House Intelligence Committee conducts
How
itself.
real does the White House think this possibility of resurrecting healthcare is?
Well, I think the president from the early days of his campaign talked about repealing and replacing. It's a commitment that he made. I think he'd like to get it done.
I'll share the frustration of many Republicans in Capitol Hill and the sentiments that the House Freedom Caucus, quote, botched this.
I think the president's comments on this speak for themselves.
I have sort of a lightning round about opioids. Is a commission being created? Is Chris Christie the head of that commission? He was sort of talking about it, but I haven't seen anything on it. And what sort of timeline will that commission have in terms of presenting findings, or what's the goal of this thing?
Well, I think it's easier to start with the goal. I think if you see the roundtable, and I know the pool will have a readout of this afterwards, the goal is to figure out, I think Governor Christie's been a leader of this in New Jersey. It's an issue that plagues countless communities more and more. And so, whether it's New Hampshire or other places in the Midwest, it's sitting there and figuring out best practices and how can we get it down and how can we provide the treatment. I think the DEA administrator was noting in the discussion that we've gotten really good at law enforcement, right? But the question is, how do we focus on the treatment? How do we focus on the prevention? How do we look at things that happened in the past to deter drug addiction from starting in the first place and to deter young people in particular from starting with drugs?
What's the White House reaction to the shooting today at the Capitol?
Well, it sounds like a very troubled individual. Obviously, I'll let law enforcement read that out, but I don't want to get ahead of. From what I understand and what I've seen, it sounds like a very troubling instance. I think, again, I don't want to get ahead of this, but it looks like law enforcement. I appreciate the efforts that the Capitol Police and others took. You literally watched people put their lives in harm's way today to protect tourists and other citizens, and so I want to commend the work of the Capitol Police and the work of law enforcement to continue to protect us at this time when Washington is in its glory with the cherry blossoms out and so many people are coming here to visit the Tidal Basin and their House of Representatives and the Senate and walk around Washington, D.C. It's reassuring to know that so many brave men and women are willing to put their lives on the line to make sure that the city stays safe.
President Trump is reportedly expected to sign legislation that would allow internet service providers to monitor internet activity and sell that information without users' permission. Will he be signing that legislation, and why does he think it's good for America? I'm wondering who this benefits apart from ISPs and their executives.
I know the House and the Senate have just passed that. When they enroll it, then we'll have further updates on that. I'm not. When we have, I know that I believe we have a statement of administration policy on that bill out. And we have further updates on a signing ceremony. I will let you know.
Healthcare. The president here last night, speaking to senators, said, quoting here, "I know that we're all going to make a deal on healthcare that is such an easy one. I have no doubt that it's going to happen very quickly." What is the renewed sense of optimism, and what exactly is very quickly?
I think there's a little bit of sound that needs to go with that. I think he was having a little bit of fun with some previous comments that have been made with respect to how easy it would be to get healthcare. But there is a renewed sense because I think, the comments and the calls that the president has gotten, as well as the vice president and other members of the senior team that have come in and said, we believe that there is a path forward. We have some ideas. We'd like to talk to you about that. I know I've seen some of the reports that have been put out regarding some of the individual members of the Senate and the House that have been up here meeting with our team. And I think there is a lot of people who have some ideas about how to move forward. And we're entertaining those. But I think the interesting thing is that despite the setback that we got last Friday, I think there is a renewed willingness from a lot of members who've made commitments to the American people and to their voters that they want to see this done, and they understand that not getting this done means that, as I said, and the president echoed when he went up to the House Republican Conference, that there's going to be a consequence for this. People need to be taken at their word. There's a lot of members that made a commitment to their voters, to their constituents, that they were going to get something done on this and repeal and replace it and address the healthcare situation, and that hasn't gotten done. And I think that's a concern for them.
Was he joking when he said that making a deal on healthcare would be an easy one?
I think if you watch the tape, it was a lighthearted moment, Jonathan, and so he was having a little.
He doesn't think it's easy to
No,
get a
he was.
deal on.
Yeah,
Okay.
no. Watch. He was having a fun time with the senators there.
The other thing that the president said last night was our soldiers are fighting like never before in Iraq. But as you know, Sean, U.S. Troops there are in a support role, an advise and assist role. What does he mean? What does the president mean when he says they're fighting there like never before? Obviously,
I think
doesn't take into consideration what happened during the Bush administration and the Obama
No.
administration.
I
They were fighting
appreciate.
house to house.
Yeah, I think that there's been some progress, particularly in Mosul, the way that they have taken back that city, and I think that for a long time there was a lot of concern about Iran moving in and dominating parts of Iraq, and I think with the advice and consent of U.S. military advisors, there's been tremendous progress in moving Iraq forward to an area of stability and to continuing to see the troops there in Iraq stand on their own. And I think that he is very pleased with the action that General Mattis and our soldiers and sailors, airmen, and Marines are taking to do that.
Ask you real quickly, you say that you embrace the House Intelligence Committee review of all of this. John McCain said earlier today that because of the potential schism within that committee, that there should be a select committee that goes from this. Would you embrace that if that happens, and what would your response be?
Again, I'm not going to get into House and Senate matters, but I as I mentioned at the outset to April, I believe that people, like, all that is, how they conduct themselves internally is up to them. That's obviously not for us to decide.
Does the president want to start a new healthcare bill or tweak the one that did not go last week?
I think we're starting with where we are and trying to move that forward. I think that is the current vessel. Thank you guys very much. I'll see you tomorrow on Thursday. Take care. I do owe you one tomorrow. I'm sorry.
When they do that, they put themselves at risk to fall for these sorts of schemes. And until they improve that, or until they collectively, we have some sort of standard that either the public or the media holds to itself, we're going to keep seeing them fall for these campaigns, whether it's Russia, by the way, or others.
Sure.
You're going to see many other nations take this on now. The playbook's been thrown out there.
Dr. Rumor, would you like to take the opportunity to address in greater detail what the Russians are doing in the French and German elections?
Well, sir, there's a wide effort in the German election to build up this far-right party, Alternative for Germany, ADF, to use them as sort of a credible challenger to Chancellor Angela Merkel. There are countless stories that are being spread through fake news sites, proliferating in the media about years of Chancellor Merkel. They, as others have pointed out, have exploited the story about the girl that was not raped, but to, again, discredit her in the eyes of the general public, so as to point out her failure to protect Germany against the flood of refugees. That's one of the major policy initiatives that she took when the Syria crisis broke out. In the French election, we just saw something that really was staggering, and that is President Putin hosted in the Kremlin the leading far-right candidate, and almost with a smirk said that we don't interfere in French elections, but we have the right to engage any candidate in the public domain in that contest. Also, Russian disinformation sources have spread malicious stories about one of the leading candidates, Emmanuel Macron, about his personal life. So
for the first time, we're really beginning to see an effort to build up and to absolutely destroy the character of others, having a double impact on potentially on the outcome of the election.
Yes, sir.
Good. Dr. Godson, just quickly, how did we respond differently when we overcame these active measures by Russians pre-80? And is there a lesson for us to learn from that in our actions now?
I think there are a number of lessons, but one was this exposure business, that we learned how to put out information into the public domain that not only was relevant for Americans but for foreigners. And we briefed that, and we developed teams that could go out and talk about these things, and so neutralize a lot. That was one of the methods that we could replicate. A second was support to elements abroad who are trying to maintain the democratic process. We developed some capabilities to do that. We still have some. One of the outstanding examples is the National Endowment for Democracy, bipartisan, able to do quite a lot, but is also limited in various ways. And so one could look back and see how we were able to do this in different ways abroad that had an effect in the past. It's not that expensive financially.
Sure.
And those methods are available.
Thank you. Mr. Watts, just very briefly, has anybody taken you up on your list of recommendations?
No.
Okay. That did not go unnoticed by the committee. I want you to know that. And nor did the comment that there was agreement on at the table that America's response to date has been woefully short of what it should be. If anything, it should be interpreted, and it probably was interpreted by the Russians, that they can double down and, in fact, do it unscathed. So, Mr. Watts, we heard you when you said fact and fiction have become wildly blurred. Let me just assure you that this committee's mission every day is to do the oversight on the intelligence community, 17 agencies, that assures the American people we do everything within the letter of the law. We first assure that to 85 other members of the Senate. So when it came time for a look inside what Russia active measures did and what our response was and how our intelligence community came to the assessments that they would, this fell right in our wheelhouse. This is what our professional staff does on a daily basis. This is a little more granular than what we do. It will take some time, and it means triaging a tremendous amount of documents. But I also heard from all three of you that if there was ever a time to get it right, it's now. And we have methodically built a process that builds a foundation of fact to build an investigation on that foundation that can hopefully come to a bipartisan finding where the conclusions are matched with the facts that we find. In some cases, as all three of you know, that might be intelligence product that can't be made public. But in every place that we can, I have pledged to the has pledged to his members, and I have pledged to mine, where we can make it public so that the American people understand it and feel that this has been credible and thorough and that the conclusions are valid, we're going to try to do that. But I also believe that the American people expect us to protect sources and methods. They expect us to work with the intelligence community in a way that strengthens what they do and how they do it, not by sharing that with everybody, but by certifying that they're doing it within the letter of the law to keep America safe. I look at this investigation as one extension of that, and it's to once again certify to the American people what we've done has been thorough, to hopefully provide some actionable conclusions for this administration, and to look back on the work that we do and believe that in 2018, 2020, we're going to be less concerned with Russia's involvement in our elections, and that the United States of America should, like we do on terrorism, work with any country in the world that might be the target of an aggressor like Vladimir Putin. So I'm grateful to you for what you've contributed to our investigation. This hearing's now adjourned.
Pretty good. Almost.
Be glad to take your questions. April.
Well, thank you, Sean.
How are
Many American millennials seem to be drawn to socialism. They came out in big numbers for Bernie Sanders in the 2016 presidential primaries. They rail against capitalism on their college campuses. They wear Che Guevara t-shirts to signal their socialist virtue. I know a lot about socialism. I live in Rio de Janeiro and I work throughout Brazil as a journalist for a popular magazine. In the early 2000s, Brazil's economy was growing rapidly. The government had enacted economic and monetary reforms and divested holdings in some state-run companies, giving the private sector more room to breathe. Inflation, a chronic problem in Brazil, was dramatically reduced. Foreign investors poured into the country, eager to catch a portion of our expanding economy. The future seemed promising. But today, our economy is in shambles, unemployment and debt are massive, and powerful politicians are being investigated for involvement in the largest scandals of fraud and corruption in the country's history. What happened? In 2002, a socialist politician named Lula da Silva ran for the presidency. He was a socialist, but painted himself as a modern, cool kind of socialist. He would be the politician who would heal national divisions and unite everyone. He even had a nickname, Lulinha Paz e Amor, which means Little Lula Peace and Love in Portuguese. But the old message about the need for income redistribution to decrease inequality was still there. The media, academic elite and celebrities assured Brazilians that by transferring the money from the rich to the poor could finally be richer. But the only ones who really got rich were Lula and his corporate and political friends. It only got worse under his successor, Dilma Rousseff. The socialists increased government spending, deficits, and debt. They called it a stimulus. They increased the minimum wage and the benefits of social programs. They call it social justice. They increased the salaries and retirement benefits of the civil service. They called it investing in the future. They handed out thousands of jobs in the government and state-owned companies as favors to their political allies. And they called it good governance. It worked for a while. Socialism always works at the beginning. But government spending just kept going up, and then Lula's socialist paradise fell apart and the economy fell with it. The outcome? From 2008 to 2015, government spending grew nearly 4 times as fast as tax revenue. The economy shrank 3.8% in 2015, the worst result in 25 years. That same year, a World Bank survey found Brazil's economy to be one of the world's worst. Out of 189 countries, we were the 16th hardest place to open a business, the 60th most difficult nation in which to register property, and the 12th most complex place to pay taxes. Economically and morally, the almost 15 years of socialist policies have greatly harmed Brazil. We also remain among the world's leaders in murder and robbery, and we rank near the bottom of industrialized nations in terms of education and healthcare. Americans take it for granted that they can be born into the lower class and reach the middle or even upper class. Many Brazilians take it for granted that they can't. But finally, some things are starting to change. There may be reason for hope. Today, more and more Brazilians see that capitalism and limited government are the only way forward. Thankfully for Brazil, Lula has been charged in several lawsuits for corruption, involvement in a criminal organization, influence peddling, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Rousseff was impeached in 2016 for falsifying the government's finances and illegally using money from state-owned banks to run the government. This crisis prompted the new government to freeze federal spending, reduce the government's role in state-owned companies, and to encourage some of the massive federal workforce to resign. No one knows whether these basic measures will be enough to rescue Brazil economically. Truthfully, the damage has been so extensive it may take decades for the country to recover. But if we do, it won't be socialism that saves us. American millennials, take note. I am Felipe Moura Brasil for for Prager University. Hi everyone, I am Felipe Moura Brasil, a journalist and columnist in Brazil. PragerU videos have made a deep impact on me and many Brazilians. If you have been impacted by these videos too, please consider making a donation to PragerU. Your support will help ensure that PragerU can keep these videos free and continue to make a difference.
The future isn't written in stone.
Good afternoon. Matt, you had a phenomenal story tonight. Get that joke? If you didn't, look it up. A little delayed reaction in the back. Before I get to the events of today, there's a few items I wanted to update you on, things that have happened since our last briefing yesterday. The President spoke with Prime Minister al-Abadi of Iraq to thank him for his productive visit and meeting on March 20th. A readout of that call should have been issued out to the pool last night. Yesterday, he also notified Congress that a national emergency declared Executive Order 13694 regarding malicious cyber-enabled attacks will continue beyond April 1st, 2017. As you all know, this notification is required by statute in order to extend the national emergency that the past administration declared. The President believes that this significant cyber-enabled activities continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to our national security and economic prosperity, and therefore he has determined that it was necessary to continue this national emergency. Last night, a federal judge in Hawaii put an indefinite hold on the President's executive order that was issued on national security. The Department of Justice is reviewing the ruling and is considering the best way to defend the President's lawful and necessary order. This ruling is just the latest step that will allow the administration to appeal. Just a week ago, the U.S. District Court in the Eastern District of Virginia upheld the President's order on the merits. The White House firmly believes that this order is lawful and necessary and will ultimately allow to move forward. This morning, we announced that the President will host President Xi of China at Mar-a-Lago on April 6th and 7th. The President looks forward to meeting with President Xi and exchanging views on each other's respective priorities and to chart a way forward on a bilateral relationship between our two nations. They will discuss the issues of mutual concern, including North Korea, trade, and regional security. And now on to some of the events of today. This morning, the President had a meeting with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. The Secretary, along with the National Economic Council and the rest of the President's team of experts, have been meeting with and hearing from stakeholders on all sides of the tax reform debate. Tax reform has been a centerpiece of the President's economic agenda from the beginning of his campaign. The team is weighing the best option to develop a plan that will provide significant middle-class tax relief and make American businesses more competitive. Enacting the first significant tax reform since the 1980 is going to be a serious undertaking, and we are at the first stages of this process, beginning to engage with members of Congress, policy group, business leaders, industry, constituents from around the country, and other stakeholders. Tax reform has been a part of the political discussion for years, and accordingly, lots of people have lots of ideas about it. We intend to hear from them. He and his team will continue to meet with those who support and oppose the various policy options as they all sit on the table, because the President is committed to delivering results that the American people and American businesses will be able to see and feel in their paychecks. On the Hill this morning, the President was glad that the nominations of his Secretary of Agriculture designate, Governor Sonny Perdue, and Secretary of Labor designate advanced out of committee. Although he's disappointed to see that Democratic senators who had previously expressed their support for Alex Acosta, the Labor Secretary designate, nonetheless, while they had previously supported him, seem to have stuck to a party line vote. The President looks forward to having them officially on the team and in the cabinet as soon as possible. Also this morning, the Department of Commerce and First Responder Network Authority, FirstNet, announced that AT&T will build the first nationwide broadband network dedicated to America's first responders. This step was part of the 9/11 Commission's recommendation on improving the ability of our police, fire, and emergency medical personnel to communicate seamlessly across jurisdictions, which is critical to their missions. It's also a sign of the incredible ability of public-private partnerships to drive innovation and solve some of our biggest problems while also creating jobs and growing the economy. Back to the schedule this afternoon, the President hosted a legislative affairs lunch on opioid and drug abuse. The lunch was an opportunity to discuss the goals and agenda of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and Opioid Crisis, which he established yesterday. The commission, which is going to be chaired by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, is the next step in the President's promise to the American people that he would take real action to keep drugs from pouring into our country and corrupting our communities. Under Governor Christie's leadership and working closely with the White House Office of American Innovation, the commission will bring together leaders on both sides of the aisle to find the best way to treat and protect the American people from this epidemic. Many members in attendance to the lunch played a key part in passing the bipartisan Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, also known as CARA, the first major federal addiction legislation in over 40 years, which authorized over $181 million to fight the opioid epidemic. Part of the mission of the President's Commission will be to ensure that those funds are spent efficiently and effectively. Too many lives are at stake to risk wasting any money on this effort. Moving on, later this afternoon, the President will welcome Prime Minister Rasmussen of Denmark for a working visit. We'll have a readout on their bilateral meeting for you at its conclusion. A couple follow-ups from yesterday. I know Hunter asked about the House and Senate passage disapproving of the federal communications regulations on privacy rules from last year. So let me just expand on that a little and get to your question. The White House supports Congress using its authority under the Congressional Review Act to roll back last year's FCC rules on broadband regulation. The previous administration, in an attempt to treat internet service providers differently than edge providers such as Google and Facebook, reclassified them as common carriers, much like a hotel or another retail outlet, and opened their door to an unfair regulatory framework. This will allow service providers to be treated fairly and consumer protection and privacy concerns to be viewed on an equal playing field. The President pledged to reverse this type of federal overreach in which bureaucrats in Washington take the interest of one group of companies over the interest of others, picking and winning winners and losers. The President has signed more legislation under the Congressional Review Act, ending job-killing rules and regulations than all previous presidents combined already, and he will continue to fight Washington red tape that stifles American innovation, job creation, and economic growth. Jeff was here yesterday, Roberta's here now, but following up on Jeff's question, he asked about the administration's position on the Paris Climate Treaty. We are currently reviewing issues related to the agreement and expect to have a decision by the time of the G7 summit, late May-ish, if not sooner. Before I take your questions, I want to speak quickly about Judge Gorsuch again and the process behind his nomination and confirmation. From the beginning, I think the president's been clear and 100% transparent about his choices, if he had been elected, who he would choose from. As a matter of fact, I'd say that the level of transparency is probably unprecedented in modern times, at least. During the campaign, he gave the American people a list of 21 judges, which he would pick his choice for the Supreme Court from. The American people sent him to the White House to nominate one of those judges, and he did it. Prior to the president making his final decision, the White House spoke with 29 senators, more than half of whom were from the Democrat side of the aisle, including every Democrat member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to seek their advice and consent on the nomination. The consensus was that the president's pick should be a respected mainstream judge. As I've laid out many times before, from unanimous consent of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals to the extraordinary low rate of majority opinions accompanied by dissent, Judge Gorsuch is a definition of a mainstream, respected judge. He has offered the Senate plenty of material to vouch for that. Since his nomination, Judge Gorsuch met with nearly 80 senators. In response to a request from the Senate Judiciary Committee, Gorsuch provided the following: over 70 pages of written answers about his personal records in response to 299 questions for the record by Democrats on the committee, the most in recent history, which he submitted within 6 days of receiving the questions. Over 75,000 pages of documents, including speeches, case briefs, opinions, and written work going back as far as college. And over 180,000 pages of email and paper records related to the judge's time at the Department of Justice. In fact, the Department of Justice provided access to many documents that would normally be guarded by various privileges in a historically unprecedented move in the spirit of cooperation with Senate Democrats. And the judge sat for 3 rounds and nearly 20 hours of questioning by the Senate Judiciary Committee, during which he was asked nearly 1,200 questions, almost twice as many as Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, or Ginsburg. The White House and the judge did all of this in the hopes that Senate Democrats, many of whom already had announced their intent to filibuster Judge Gorsuch's nomination, would look beyond their political games and see for themselves how eminently qualified he is to sit on the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, it looks more and more like Senate Democrats would rather do all that they did in reading and questioning for nothing more than political theater. Finally, before I take your questions, a letter was transmitted just recently to the ranking member and chairman of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees that said, in the ordinary course of business, National Security staff discovered documents that we believe are in response to your March 15, 2017 letter to intelligence community seeking, quote, documents necessary to determine whether information collected on U.S. persons was mishandled and leaked, end quote. We have and will invite the Senate and House ranking members and chairman up to the White House to view that material in accordance with their schedule. With that, I'd be glad to take a few of your questions. Cheryl.
Thanks, Sean. I'm trying to gauge the probability of a government shutdown at the end of April. Are your directions to the Capitol Hill to hold firm on the spending cuts that the president wants, or to try to wheel and deal and get a bill that can keep the government open?
I don't know that they're mutually exclusive. I think we want
pushback on Capitol Hill from some of the
well,
spending
there
cuts.
genuinely is. But I think that we want both. I think we want to maintain some of the spending priorities as well as some of the reductions in the 2017 budget. We want to do so responsibly and do so within the priorities that the president's laid out. I think his funding requests and priorities are laid out in the budget that Director Mulvaney detailed and sent up for the remainder of 2017. There's some key things in that, and I think that that it is going to begin a conversation that we will continue to have with the House and Senate. But I don't think both of those goals are mutually exclusive. Obviously, we don't want the government to shut down, but we want to make sure that we're funding the priorities of the government. John Decker.
Thanks a lot, Sean. I wanted to ask about some news that the president made today with a tweet that he put out on Twitter. He seemed to be picking a fight with the Freedom Caucus. And the Freedom Caucus, as you know, has 30 members. Does the president realize how important this caucus is, this coalition is, in terms of passing a replacement bill for the Affordable Care Act and passing the rest of his legislative agenda?
Well, of course, he understands that the goal of all legislation is get to a majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and so. But at the end of the day, he recognizes that he has a bold and robust agenda that he is trying to enact, that he ran on and told the American people that he would do when he was president, and he's going to get the votes from wherever he can.
Can you pass that agenda without the help of the Freedom Caucus?
Well, there's two questions. One is, I mean, mathematically, yes. But secondly, I think that there's a few members of the Freedom Caucus, both prior to last Friday's vote and since then, who have expressed a willingness to want to work with him rather than necessarily as a block. And I think that there continues to be some promising signs in that with that. So again, I think part of it is that I think if people are more concerned with voting as a block than in what's the best interest of their constituents, the American people, he's hoping that people will see the bigger picture, the goals that we outlined, and in sometimes not like the really good be the enemy of the perfect.
He seemed to imply in that tweet that he would be in favor of primarying some individuals in the Freedom Caucus who oppose his agenda. Is that correct? Did I read that correctly?
I'm going to say, I'm going to let the tweet speak for itself. For those of you who think, or just for your understanding, it would be improper of me to discuss the election or defeat of any candidate from this podium. Matt.
Thanks, Sean. 2 questions, if you don't mind.
I want phenomenal questions from you.
That's what I'll give you. First, we know now...
you get...
I know I got it. So, two White House officials, according to New York Times reporting, provided Representative Nunes with the information that he spoke about last week. And according to the Times, the senior director for intelligence on the NSC, who was hired by Michael Flynn, started going through these documents after the president's tweet, the wiretapping tweet. So I'm wondering if the White House thinks it's appropriate for national security officials to be conducting what's basically a political task, which is trying to find information that then validates something the president said.
Yeah. So I've read the report, and respectfully, I think your question assumes that the reporting is correct. And so I would just suggest to you that the letter that was submitted earlier to the chairman and the ranking members of the two intelligence committees on the Hill, the reason that the White House has asked them to come up is to view that information. And again, I don't want to get in front of that. As I've said before, we are not as obsessed with the process as much as the substance, and I think that our goal is to make sure that the ranking members of both committees, as well as the chairman, see the information, the materials that are important to this, and then worry about the outcome at the end of this.
And then on a different topic, with Ms. Walsh's departure today, are you expecting any more staffing shakeups in the West Wing?
No. Catherine.
Sean, are you saying that the New York Times reporting today is not correct?
I'm saying that in order to comment on that story, would be to validate certain things that I'm not at liberty to do.
For days you haven't been able to tell us who you met with.
And I understand that, and again, and I think that there's an assumption, as I've said before, we cannot condone I mean, in the same way that you protect sources, when I call you and say, you've got 18 anonymous sources, and you go, well, I can't reveal my sources, Chairman Nunes, in conducting an investigation and a review, has an opportunity to have his sources. Our view is that the smart move was to make all the materials available to the chairman and the ranking member of the relevant committees. And I understand the obsession with the process piece. But we are focused on the substance of it, and I think the goal is to make sure that people have the substance that are looking into this, that we have asked to look into this.
And the White House did make materials available already.
No, we've sent a letter within the past few hours to both of those committees, informing them that we wanted to make that available to them.
And what kind of message do you think this sends to people watching this? I mean,
I think it sends a message that we want them to look into this, that I think that as we have maintained from all along, that I think there's a belief that the president has maintained that there was surveillance that occurred during the 2016 election that was improper, and that we want people to look into this and take the appropriate legal, responsible steps to both understand it and then address it. Major.
I want to read to you something you said here at the podium on March 23rd when you were originally asked if the White House might have had any role in providing information to Chairman Nunes. You first said it didn't make any sense to you, and you went on to say, and I'm quoting you here, I don't know why he, Chairman Nunes, would brief the speaker and then come down here to brief us on something that we would have briefed him on. Doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. So I'm not aware of it, but it doesn't really pass the smell test. There's now reporting, which I can't tell if you're disputing or not, that identifies 2 people within this White House as the sources of this information. So I'm just trying to put these things together.
Right.
Where you said that doesn't pass the smell test on March 23rd. Now there's reporting
Well,
that
I think,
suggests it
again,
is within the White House that they were the sources of this. I'm just trying to put those 2 things together.
Right, so number one, the first quote that you're reading, if you actually go back, I was responding to, I was very clear that I said, based on what Chairman Nunes has said, I believe the following doesn't make sense.
Accepting that.
So
I'm
that's an
gathering that
important
you've
part
learned
of it.
something new since then. So please tell us what
Right,
you
and again,
learned.
no, because again, Major, I've commented on this both yesterday and today, that your obsession with who talked to whom and when is not the answer here. It should be the substance. In the same way that when you guys print a story with 18 anonymous sources, your obsession is the substance. It seems now that you continue to look at it from a backwards prism, which is, you know, what happened, who drove in what gate, who did they meet with, what were they wearing that day, as opposed to what's the underlying substance of this. Did something happen in the 2016 election? Did leaks occur? We are not going to engage actively in that kind of leaking that has been a problem. In fact, if you look at the Obama's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense that is out there, Evelyn Farkas, she made it clear that it was their goal to spread this information around, that they went around and did this, and she said, quote, that's why there's so many leaks. They have admitted on the record that this was their goal, to leak stuff and they literally, she said on the record, Trump's team. There are serious questions out there about what happened and why and who did it. And I think that's really where our focus is in making sure that that information gets out.
But can't the process, from your vantage point, validate the importance of the substance?
Well, I think there's a review that we've asked for probably
You told us that you're willing to look into and ask
And I am.
questions about the process and provide us answers.
And
That's all I'm trying to go through.
I don't. Please don't put words in my mouth. I never said I would provide you answers. I said we would look into it. The responsible thing for us to do is to provide the individuals and the committees who are doing the review the materials that they're looking for, or some of them. We don't know what they're exactly looking for, what they've seen and what they haven't. Our goal is to be as forthright as possible. They asked the intelligence communities and others in a March letter for information. We are willing to provide them with the information that we have, the materials that we have come across. And I think that is an important step. Again, it is not, our obligation is to make sure that a review is done both in the House and the Senate as we asked for a few weeks ago, not to make sure that we illegally leak out information to you.
And when you say we have information, are you disputing the reports in the New York Times?
I'm not commenting on the reports, Major. I just got asked the same question.
You're saying we, so I'm just
No,
trying
no,
to find out their names.
I'm saying
of
no.
people who
We,
work for the
meaning the
NSC,
White House,
who work at
is
this
not
White House,
is not
who've
going to
been
start
named now
confirming.
publicly for the first time.
I get it. We are not going to start commenting on one-off anonymous sources that publications publish.
If it were wrong, would you tell us?
I'm not going to get into it. As I've just said, I get it. How many times you can ask the same question, Hunter?
Thank you, Sean. I have 2 questions. The first, President Trump is pushing for a major tax cut, increases in defense and infrastructure spending, and the border wall. Does he think this agenda has to be deficit neutral, or is he open to plans that might initially add to the debt?
Well, I think when it comes to tax reform, he's got 3 underlying goals. 1 is tax simplification, 2 is to lower the rates, and 3 is to grow jobs in the economy. And I think part of it is that if you look at it dynamically, as the plan develops, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we're not there yet. We are beginning that process of engaging with stakeholders. As the plan develops, and there's a cost put on it, that's going to be a decision that gets looked at, as well as what are the economic growth and job creation aspects to it. So to answer that question without knowing what the full scope of it is looking at something and answering it in a vacuum.
And then just to clarify one thing with the New York Times story, I know you won't identify Congressman Nunes as sources, but isn't it abundantly clear that at least some White House officials had to be involved in him getting information here because they would need to help him access the complex?
I cannot get into who those individuals were.
Right, but it was someone at the White House, right? They
Well,
need to help him have access.
Again, if I start going down the path of confirming and denying one thing, that we're going down a very slippery slope. I've made my position very clear on that. Jessica.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for announcing the visit of the Chinese president. I have a couple of questions about that visit, if you'd entertain me. Can you talk about the location and how it was chosen for this visit?
There's, as you can imagine, on any trip, no matter who the foreign leader is, there's a lot of discussion that goes back and forth between the White House, the State Department, and the equivalents of the other head of governments, their appropriate counterparts. And those are kind of things that go back and forth in terms of how long, the activities, what will be discussed. Every single thing is discussed on both sides. And so that was a long and ongoing negotiation with the government of China and with their representatives, lasting several weeks now.
So how did you arrive at Mar-a-Lago?
I'm not going to get into the back and forth. I would just suggest to you that both sides discussed various locations and topics and agendas and length, etc., and aspects to the trip, and this is what we've arrived at.
So what is the goal for the White House to accomplish during the visit?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is I think this is an opportunity for President Trump to develop a relationship in person with President Xi. He's spoken to him on the phone a few times. But we have big problems, and I mean everything from the South China Sea to trade to North Korea. There are big issues of national and economic security that need to get addressed. And I think there's going to be a lot on the table when it comes to that over the 2 days that they will talk.
And lastly, the Chinese are expecting the White House to provide some sort of framework for the relationship to be viewed for. Are you prepared for that? And can you talk a little bit about what that framework might be?
Can you expand on that a little?
Kind of put a floor under the relationship, looking for how to view the relationship. Obviously, you had the rebalance and the pivot in the prior administration. Right. Is there a tagline or a vision for U.S.-China relations that you will roll out during this visit?
We'll see. If you have any hashtags, let me know. But I think right now we're not worried so much about slogans as much as progress. There's a lot of big things that we need to accomplish with China, and I think that we will work on that. Kristen.
Thanks, Sean. Did the president direct anyone in this White House or in his national security team to try to find information or intelligence to back up his assertion about wiretapping?
I'm not aware of anything directly. I'd have to look into that in terms of, again, there's two sides of this. One is the information side, and two is the policy and the activities and the legal piece of what happened. Those are big buckets, if you will.
So it's possible.
I'm not going to comment on it.
And one more. Don't sort of the daily questions about this make it necessary to have some type of outside independent investigation to lift any lingering cloud that there may be?
No. I think you have two committees looking into this. The FBI has been looking into this. As they mentioned at the hearing, I mean, how many do you want? I understand that you may not have, that there's...
The House Intelligence investigation is still valid given all of these questions?
How is it not valid? I mean, I'm asking,
there are all of these questions about where Devin Nunes got his information from.
And that's why I think that we have invited all of the relevant...
Cloud, would it not be smart to have an outside independent investigation?
Well, again, I'm not, right now, I think you've got the FBI, probably other intelligence committees that looked into 17 of them issued a report earlier in terms of involvement in the 2016 election. And then you've got two congressional committees looking into it. So I'm not really sure the exact need. I think that people are doing, I understand sometimes there's a need for you guys to have more information, more sources. I think this is being done in a responsible way where people are being discussed what they know at an appropriate classification level and information is being shared.
Can you just quickly talk about the timing of inviting the leaders of this investigation to the White House now? Is it because of this report? Why not do that initially?
Well, I think a couple things. One is they tasked the various committees in mid-March or the agencies rather, to provide information. We felt we had information that was relevant, and I think there was some, there's a desire to make sure that both sides of the aisle who are looking into this, as well as both chambers, had that information. Anita.
Eric Trump gave an interview a few days ago to Forbes magazine in which he said that he would update his father regularly, perhaps quarterly, on the business, including giving profitability reports. So I have two questions about that. One is, have they spoken about the business since January? And two, how does this not violate what the president set out as the protocols for how he would deal with the business?
Well, two things. I don't know if they've spoken. It's not, that's maybe a question better directed to the Trump organization. But secondly, I think everything that he's done is in accordance with what the council's office and the ethics folks.
Just following up, I believe he said that he wasn't going to talk to his children, his sons, about the business. So how is that?
I think everything that is being done in terms of reports or updates is being done in a consultation with the council's office. So I think that's Justin.
I have two things I want to ask. The first is to just follow on Major and ask about the substance. It's sort of unclear what you guys are telling the chairman and the ranking members you have. Is it information that would validate the president's claims about surveillance during the 2016 campaign, or is it information about their broader Russia investigation?
I'm not here to share that. That's why we've invited them up to view it in a classified setting, in an appropriate setting. It's not to be shared with people that don't have the appropriate clearances and access it.
You're not intending to imply that this is the information that the Chairman Nunes has been talking about.
No, what I'm suggesting is that that there has been information that has been material that has been made come to light, and that we want to make sure that the people who are conducting the review have that information, have access to it.
All right. And then Westinghouse Energy filed for bankruptcy yesterday. I'm wondering if that's prompted national security concerns within the administration, and if there is any effort within the administration to sort of help them navigate this bankruptcy, considering the
I'll have to check on that. I think there's obviously a couple departments that would be interested in that. Steve?
John, I just want to ask you to elaborate more on what you have so far told us. You said that in the ordinary course of business, the national security staff discovered documents. Can you explain how these documents were uncovered? What does it mean?
Yeah, I don't think, no, I'm not. That's why we've invited them up for into a classified setting, is for them to see these materials and understand this is not the setting that is appropriate to discuss that.
So who in the national security staff then uncovered the documents?
Good question. That is not, again, as I've mentioned multiple times, we're not here to go through the process. Our job is to get to the substance of this and to make sure that the people who have the appropriate access and authority to look into this matter and then take appropriate steps have that.
Are you in a position right now to deny or rule out the possibility that members of the National Security Staff have already informed the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee?
I'm not going to get into any further details on this. I would just suggest to you, again, if I can go back for a second to something that the Obama administration's Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense noted very clearly on the record, that they were engaged in an effort to spread information about Trump officials that had come up in intelligence. That's not, that is several networks. Evelyn Forecast made that proclamation about what was going on during the Obama administration regarding the Trump team. So that is something that they made very clear on the record. John.
A couple of things, John. First of all, on the Freedom Caucus, in response to the president's tweet, Congressman Amash of Michigan responded on camera saying most people don't like to be bullied, in response to the president, also saying that sending out such tweets is constructive in the 5th grade. It may allow a child to get his way, but that's not how government works. Could you take a moment to respond to Congressman Amash? Was the president trying to bully the Freedom Caucus?
No, I think this is consistent with everything that he has said since Friday of last week. And I think that he is looking for members on both sides of the aisle who want to be constructive to achieve the goal of a patient-centric healthcare system. That's it, plain and simple. And I think that his comments and his tweets speak for themselves with respect to how he feels and why. John?
Following on that, is this a divide and conquer strategy?
No, it's a math strategy, which is to get to 216 and pass an effort and continue to move the agenda forward.
And then if I could follow on what Major said, you've accused the people in this room several times of being more interested in process than actually in the substance of things. But when information is discovered by the Intelligence Committee chairman in the House at the White House that is potentially exculpatory to what the president has tweeted out, and it's reported that one of the people who was involved in uncovering that information is a White House staff member who was kept in his position over the request of the National Security Advisor by the political leadership here at the White House, does the process not then take on some relevance?
Well, the process in the sense that we are, as I've noted, we've invited the chairman and the ranking members who are looking into this and reviewing the matter up here. That doesn't mean that we allow uncleared members from the media to come in and look at it. that means,
asking that question.
no, you are, you said, but I think it is,
I'm not
because,
asking that question. That's not what I asked. What I asked was, when you have that connection of dots all the way along, does the provenance of this information not become relevant to the overall investigation?
it's up for the people who are conducting the review to decide that, not for the people in this room to decide it. It is up to the people who are cleared to look at that information and that material, to look at it and make their evaluations. And I think they are conducting the review. You've seen very clearly, both on the House side and then starting today on the Senate side, them looking into this matter. That is the appropriate venue, forum, and personnel to be reviewing it, plain and simple.
Sean, a quick
Zeke.
follow-up on that.
Zeke.
You mentioned
Zeke.
a couple of times
Zeke.
that...
Thank you.
When has the president already been briefed on this information? That,
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Has the president already been briefed on this information that you're now inviting the congressional committee chairs to come and view? And when was he briefed on it?
I will look into that. I'm not entirely sure when or what the status of that is, but I can follow up on that.
You brief? Why would the White House brief?
I understand the question. Like I said, I will look into whether or not where that stands. Blake.
Trouble on taxes. The timeline here had been healthcare first, tax reform second. There was a Fox poll out released yesterday that says 73% of Americans want tax reform to happen this year, with healthcare now at least being on hold. Is healthcare the number one priority for this administration? Is tax reform the number one priority for this administration at this point, or is healthcare still kind of taking up some of the oxygen?
Well, I don't know that it's taking up oxygen. I think there's plenty of oxygen for both to go on. I think the president would still like to see it done. But I think there's no reason that we can't. I mean, if you look at the timeline for tax reform, you're talking several months. And so I think that the process is beginning on that, and I think you can have a dual-track strategy. It's not an either-or proposition.
And you described what was going on with the meeting today as the first phase. Can you lay out to us what is somewhat entailed with that first phase?
Yeah.
Is the president being given detailed strategies, or is it broad principles? What is involved in this first phase?
I think it's a little of both. They're talking about the process that they intend to partake. How this is going to lay out, who they're engaging with, how they're going to begin that process, and then some of the guiding principles and making sure that any updates that he has or any principles that he wants to suggest are incorporated into that plan as they begin to meet with stakeholders. But part of this is to level set with him as to what they tend to do and how they intend to do it.
You just mentioned a dual track between healthcare and tax reform, but then there's also infrastructure hanging out there. So can all of those go together?
Lots of tracks. I mean, again, remember, they're not all the same people. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. But I think part of this is that you got to remember that some things can happen sooner than others because of the legislative calendar. Some things are going to take longer because of both the legislative calendar and because of the number of individuals involved and the complexity of the situation. But there's a lot of things that can be moving at once because of how they'll play out. John Gizzi.
Thank you, Sean. Turning to the foreign front, yesterday, Vladimir Kara-Murza, the twice poisoned Russian dissident and vice chairman of the Open Russia movement, testified before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee backing continued sanctions against Russia. He also called on Secretary of State Tillerson to meet with Russian civil society members, in other words, anti-Putin dissidents like himself, when he makes his trip to Moscow next month. Mr. Kara-Murza also said he was meeting with many members of Congress, both parties, but he would be very happy to meet with any administration officials. Are there any plans for the President or anyone in the White House to meet with Mr. Kara-Murza, and will Mr. Tillerson meet with the Russian civil society?
I would suggest to you, I'm not aware of anything yet. Both the National Security Council as well as the State Department are probably more appropriate for you to address that to. Alexis.
Can I ask a question before I do get some clarification on the answer that you gave to Hunter and to Major? I thought it was just yesterday that you said that when you were asked who cleared in Chairman Nunes, that you had asked some preliminary questions, had not gotten answers, and that you would continue to ask.
Yeah.
So my question today is, you know the answers to that, and you are saying you will not answer that question today, or you
that's
don't
not,
know?
Right. No, so what I'm saying to you is that the decision that has been made is to bring in all of the relevant individuals that are reviewing the situation and make them available, that getting into sources and process is not the proper way to conduct this review, and we want the people who are conducting it to understand more fully the materials, not necessarily who came in what time and whatever.
So just to clarify again, you asked the questions, you were not given answers.
No, I'm just saying that they're just,
You
I
asked
understand.
that, wait, let me finish.
No.
You said yesterday that you asked, you didn't get the answers, and so what you're telling us today is you are never going to get the answer, you are never going to get the answer to who cleared in Chairman Nunes.
No, what I'm saying is that the decision was made, it's supposed to focus on the process, to focus on the substance, and that the decision was made.
Answering my question.
I let you ask the question, so let me answer it, please. And the answer that I'm giving you is that the decision was made internally to focus on the individuals who are doing the review, both Republicans and the Democrats, House and Senate, and have them come in and look at the materials. That's what the focus should be, Alexis. Caitlin.
But wait, here's my bigger question. The
That was a
president
pretty good-
has expressed his affirmation, his support for the finding that Russia interfered with the 2016 election. That is the centerpiece of the investigation at the FBI and the Senate Intelligence Committee. My question is, can you update us, what is the president doing now in the administration to respond to Director Comey's testimony that interference is not just election year based, but continuing?
What you're talking about, the executive order, is that correct?
I'm just asking, can you update, what is the administration doing to prevent that, to respond to that preliminary finding that we already know, that is continuing?
Well, so the executive order that the president signed that continues the national emergency deals with looking into malicious attempts and cyber attempts to come into the United States. That's what the executive order that he signed was.
That's the sum total of the response so far.
Well, I'm not going to get into what we're doing, what's being done behind the scenes in terms of the intelligence and law enforcement community, but the bottom line is that there was an emergency declared with respect to challenges that the United States faces from a variety of actors outside the United States to come in and use cyber techniques to hack the United States. The national emergency will continue under the president to address the threats that we face from abroad and from a variety of places. That's it. April.
Wait, Sean.
April.
Yes, Sean. So, what? He had already he called on someone else. I'm sorry. Go ahead and then come back to you.
Okay, I'll do it. Caitlin and April. I'm sorry.
She can go first, but I'll just go after her.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. So, Sean, what is the ultimate goal of the leaders coming in to get this information, and will it be information that Nunes received plus, or will it just be basically a synopsis of what Nunes received?
Well, it's going to be the materials that are relevant to the discussion in the area that they're reviewing. And that's up to them to decide the relevancy of that. I think we have, or the National Security Committee has gone into come upon some materials that they want to share with them. It's up to them to make a decision about the relevance of those documents and what they lead them to believe. But I mean, there's two issues here. One, April, is what do they see, and then what do they want to see in addition to that, or as a result of those materials, right? So in other words, they may see things and say, hey, this is interesting. I wonder if there's a pattern. This is interesting. I want to see more. Or they make a conclusion right away. But that's part of the idea of, to your first part of your question, of sharing information with them, is to allow the members of both of the committees on a bipartisan basis to come in and review materials that we think are relevant to the issues that the president talked about with respect to surveillance, the masking, unmasking of individuals, the handling of it, et cetera, and then it's up to those members to decide what to do with that information, how to explore that more in depth.
So ultimately, in their questioning, they could actually wind up getting what Nunes received, possibly if they dig and ask different questions, just sitting in the intelligence meetings like the president does, digging. If he decides to dig more, he'll get more.
It depends. I think that's possible. I don't want to prejudge what they ask and what comes in response to it. It also has to do with what documents we have. They may go down a particular trail and have to follow up with an agency and say, we saw this, can we see a follow-up on that? As you saw from media reports, the NSA has been asked to provide documentation to the House. My understanding from the reports is that was ongoing, and maybe some of the materials that they see prompt them to ask additional questions, but that's part of providing it to them. It's an ongoing review, and what we want is for them to see these materials and come to conclusions, or need more information to come to a conclusion. But this is part of that review process.
Are they allowed the same type of briefing with their ranking and who they are? No matter him being the head of the Intel committee, are some of these other members allowed to see the same things that he sees? Because even though they're not the head of the committee, are they allowed to see that?
My understanding would be that they would.
Okay, and lastly, Sean, do you know who allowed Nunes in?
No.
You don't know?
No. Caitlin.
I've got 2 questions for you.
Sure.
One is, has anyone in the White House ever raised the possibility of a cabinet position or a top intelligence post later on in the administration for Devin Nunes?
Not that I'm aware of.
And secondly, will the president hold a press conference so he can answer questions on the surveillance claims and all these intelligence revelations himself?
I'm not good enough?
Not that you're not good enough, but he's the one who made the claims. You didn't make the claims, he made the claims.
Thank you. I will convey your request to him. I know that I've done it before, and we'll see. I'm sure that at some point he enjoyed the last one so much. Would you like tomorrow?
Works for me.
Does that work for you? Okay, well, let me see what I can come up with, Cecilia.
I just want to clarify, do you believe, from what you know about these materials, do they validate the president's wiretap claims?
I don't know. I have not seen the materials. It is members of the National Security Committee who have come across these documents that want to make them available to the members who are leading the review.
And why not just be more forthcoming about this entire process of who let Nunes in? If this was enough, if the president of the United States could tweet this claim about wiretapping, doesn't the American public have a right to know more right now?
Yes, they do, and I think that's why we're going through a process. Is that and I say this respectfully, I understand that you want all of those process answers. What day did someone come in? What were they wearing? What door did they come in? The relevant questions are about the substance of this. And it's interesting, I don't get the same thing when I see these unpublished stories with anonymous sources. You don't ever tell me who your sources were. Glenn, I'm actually asking Cecilia's question if you could be as polite as not to interrupt her. Thank you. Do you accept his apology? That's very...
I would cede the floor to Glenn.
Thank you. That's not how it works, though. But I would argue that you guys have, when you write a story and you call and say, I have 4 anonymous sources that said whatever, and I say, okay, well, who are the sources and where they come? You go, sorry, I'm not revealing anything to you, but the substance that I'm asking you to respond to. But when the shoe's on the other foot, you're all about the process. The bottom line is that there are 2 congressional committees that are conducting reviews of this situation. And those committees are looking at the relevant information and talking to the relevant people. To your point about the process, we have made individuals available and encouraged individuals to testify or to meet with or to discuss with that have been approached. So I think that what we are doing is, frankly, and I know you probably disagree, but I think that we are doing the responsible thing by making sure that documents and materials are shown to people with the appropriate classifications and the appropriate settings, and that the people that the different committees would like to discuss these matters with are made available to them. I think that's the responsible way of handling this. Yeah.
Sean, thank you very much. I have 2 questions, one on Venezuela and another one on climate policies. I want to start with Venezuela because today the Supreme Court in Venezuela said they decide to take over the Congress powers, and the opposition say there is a coup underway. Do you consider there is a coup underway in Venezuela, and what can we expect the United States to do? And the other question is on climate change because President Obama signed also bilateral climate deals with Brazil, China, and India. And what will happen to those?
Well, on the first one, respectfully, I would send you this. I would refer you to the State Department. The only Supreme Court I'm really focused on right now is ours and getting Judge Neil Gorsuch confirmed by the Senate. So I'd be glad. I think the State Department's more of an appropriate venue to discuss the activities over there. And on second, I think when it comes to things like the Paris Treaty, as I mentioned at the outset, that is being. I understand, but I think that there are things that we will have updates on all of these things as we move forward. Right now, I've got nothing on that subject yet.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that the Trump administration is proposing more modest changes to NAFTA. Like, for example, they're leaving the arbitration panel that deals with trade disputes in place, et cetera, et cetera. Is the White House backing away from some of the more sweeping changes to NAFTA that the president proposed during the campaign?
You know, I would just argue that Robert Lighthizer isn't even nominated yet. That is not a statement of administration policy at this point. There is nothing that in those documents that we are confirming, or in that report rather, that we are confirming. That is not a statement of administration policy. That is not an accurate assessment of where we are at this time. And I think our goal is to get Robert Lighthizer appointed as the next ambassador and U.S. trade representative. And then when we have that, we will have plenty of updates on where we go with respect to NAFTA and the rest of our trade agreement. With that, I'm going to say goodbye. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you. I'm sorry, I promised 2 days in a row.
Thank you. I got one on foreign policy and one on domestic policy.
Okay.
First one is many Republicans were very critical of how President Obama had handled the Iranian Green Revolution about 6 years ago. So my question is, if mass protests across Russia develop into a movement, is this something that, what does the administration feel its role should be regarding that?
I'm not going to. That's a hypothetical question to talk about what would happen, and if I think when it comes, I know, but when it comes to protests, we obviously encourage, as we did last Sunday, the peaceful the government of Russia to allow the peaceful protests of individuals throughout their country. We obviously support the people to have a voice in every government throughout the world.
And on the subject of partisanship and obstructionism, whose responsibility does the president feel it is to put an end to partisanship, and who needs to be reaching out to whom collectively?
I think it's a two-way street. I think we, I think part of it is that we the president and the first lady extended an invitation the other night for everyone to come. I think we were excited to see a third of Senate Democrats come. I wish we had seen more. There's an opportunity, I think, to engage in a discussion about some of the issues and come together. But I would argue that, when you look at this fight on Gorsuch, I mean, there are, I don't disagree with the fact that if you're a Democrat, you probably don't necessarily agree with some of the rulings and some of the philosophies of Judge Gorsuch. I get that. But at the end of the day, they have always agreed. In fact, in most cases, the filibuster has never been the norm. It hasn't. And it is odd to see that these individuals who have, it's one thing to vote no, it's one thing to say that we don't agree, but to now turn to filibustering or threatening to filibuster Senate unbelievably qualified people. And there's nobody that I'm aware of, even on the left, that is suggesting that Judge Gorsuch isn't qualified to serve as a Supreme Court justice. Republicans in the past have allowed Democrat presidents to have their nominees voted on up or down, and for the most part, when you go back through President Obama, President Clinton, Republicans have joined with Democrats to allow people who are qualified to go onto the court. And to see this new precedent be formed by Leader Schumer is disappointing, because this is a huge, huge crack. I think there was a column, one of the papers today, I think you are really fundamentally changing how the Senate's going to operate by doing this. And I think that's an important, they can disagree with him philosophically. I get that. But when you have an election, you can assume that a Republican president is going to choose Republicans for appointments and for federal judgeships, and the Democrats will do the same with their time in office. But it was Obama's, nominees that got through, all with Republican support, and it's difficult to understand why, when you've got someone as eminently qualified as Gorsuch, that this is the stake that they want to drive. And I think it further sets a partisan divide in our country when we can't allow people who are qualified and universally so to get on the bench.
Is it not being done from the president's side to try
I think
to...
so, sure. But I think it's a two-way street. I would ask you, what is, I remember a few years ago, there was all this talk about, from the get-go of Obama, Democrats made hay about how they wanted to see him as a one-term president. I've seen a similar tactic from Democrats now about how they want to defeat him, they want to stop his agenda, and there's no sense of them wanting to work with this president. So at some point, I think we have shown a willingness to bring them together. It's amazing how many senators, when you talk to them over the course of the last, almost 70 days, have said, I've been to the White House more in the last 70 days of a Trump administration than I was during 8 years of an Obama administration. And I think that that speaks to the president's desire to bring people together and to find common ground on areas of mutual agreement where we can move the country forward. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.
Information found. Can you tell us when it was found?